Just hit start streaming. This is one of those things that like I don't do it for like 2 or 3 weeks and I forget how to do it.
Yeah.
All right. So according to my YouTube
Yeah.
feed
Your
here, we
stream.
are live.
I see it.
Hey everybody. Probably nobody because this is a stealth morning stream. Episode 7 of Kyle and Friends with Nick Stumphauzer, who is a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker, or
But by outside pressure, not intrinsic motivation.
okay. Um, and just sort of interested in diet and stuff, mostly repeat ideas. About the filmmaking, when I saw that you did that, that was kind of one of those things where I was like, wait, like people can do that? It's like when you meet like a stand-up comedian who like
right.
makes money on that, you're kind of like, I thought that was like for special people, like.
Yeah.
So how does one actually, like, did you just like go to school for it and then just find gigs?
I started when I was very young, um, even younger than I am now, which is supremely young. And I went to high school and was watching my friends kind of go to the counselors and figure out what universities they wanted to go to and what they wanted to study and all that. And it never appealed. Like I would spend, I took every high level class I could to get like those college credits and then never used them. I didn't go to college.
Mm.
I just went to a trade school. It was like a 13-month hands-on program, like crash course, very Hollywood inspired people from the industry. And then just continued freelancing. And then I moved here to the city I'm in Florida because I was hired by a company to produce a specific film. So up until 6 months ago, I was just the comedian that wasn't making, like I was just doing the stand up in the bars and being like, yeah, I'm a comedian, but not
Open
actually.
mic night.
I was open mic night up until 6 months ago, and now I am minimum salary comedian.
Okay.
So
Yeah, well that sounds cool. I had a couple of friends that really wanted to make films and they actually filmed a movie when I was like college aged and I was in a scene in it. I don't think they finished it though. I have a t-shirt from it. Like they made t-shirts for the movie. And the scene I was in, I
rough.
it was like they made me wear, I was supposed to be, this was in like the year 2003 or so. So you have to understand that having a character that's like crypto homosexual as a joke in a movie is just like all good fun, you
Yeah.
know? So like they made me wear like a tiny little tank top like
Uh,
athletic fiber type, like almost like what like a
right.
girl would wear to the gym or something.
Sure.
And like a bottom that was like in some way similar to that. I actually don't remember. And we were like playing paintball in the woods and I was somebody's paintball. Like I was the partner in paintball of a character in the movie, and I was supposed to kind of like be their friend, but like sort of hitting on them or something. Um, this is like,
It went on to win Oscars, I imagine.
yeah, I don't think it was
Shape
ever.
of
It was
Water.
called what was it called?
I can't wait for the title.
Gamer World or something. It was, like, yeah, that's so weird. You know how long ago that was? That was like almost as old as you are long ago.
Kyle, I was 5.
Yeah.
I was 5 years. I didn't know I didn't know I existed.
Wow. Okay. So that was like an age check there.
Well, I think I've said before that if you do the Ray Pete thing right, if you do the um, diet, whatever, correctly, lifestyle, worldview thing correctly, you should look young. and I think I've commented to you before about you and Danny and some of the other people in the community that, like, I work around people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and you guys look like you're in college.
Mm.
I look like I'm 16, and I'm hoping to kind of keep that streak going in perpetuity.
Yeah, I think like I don't know how much of that is really like I it would be so interesting to like see yourself from like in the future from like different lifestyles, and see how much that you could diverge. I think like some of the obvious stuff is like people that are like taking like meth uh that like ages you a certain way.
Mm,
Cigarettes have like a characteristic kind of effect.
mm,
And I always one of the first things that I always said when I first started like writing stuff on a blog was that Dave Asprey looked awful, and he looked bad in a way that was like because people look the way they look, but I felt like the way he looked was like kind of so advanced aged or like
mm.
unhealthy that it was
Sickly.
like disqualifying. I felt like he had like reached a bar of like, okay, so
Yeah.
just the way you look is, the funny part is he was this like genius marketer, or at least successful, and all of his marketing had himself front and center. So I don't know, maybe I'm just totally off base because obviously
You're
like
not.
millions of, well, however many people it took, like hundreds of thousands, I don't know, like have bought his coffee, and his this and
Right.
that.
I remember seeing a video in 2013 of him on a show talking about modafinil, which seems to be the most quintessential video that Dave Asprey would make. And he was saying, I don't remember what he was saying, but he looked, he had shorter hair and relatively smooth skin, not too many crow's feet. He seemed sharp. He still had a bit of that speech impediment, and then I stopped following him, a year or two ago, and I saw him now, and he kind of is giving the Benjamin Button vibes off. Like I can't tell which direction he's aging, like if it's backward from 100 or what. Um, but it seems the stuff. I don't want to just take a dump on Dave Asprey because a lot of these people are formative at different stages.
Hmm.
Um, but it seems to have like addled his mind. Like he seems unwell when he speaks. You can kind of see when someone speaks in the way that their eyes look.
Right.
And I have to wonder if it is the uh, things on the head that I'm gonna put this sensor and this electromagnetism by my skull to monitor and modulate.
Yeah. Um, yeah, the whole biohacking thing, it's like it's this real weird flirtation with like on the one hand, I think the reason why they do so many things is they kind of don't believe they're real. Like the biohackers themselves, they're like, "Oh yeah, I'm like doing, you know, like cryo electro blah 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 therapy." And they're some of them are so aggressive with it and they do like so many modalities, I guess you could say, that and they would never do that with like pharmaceutical compounds or do you know what I'm saying? So there's like this weird flirtation with like we don't
Right.
actually believe this works. They're kind of hoping it
Yeah.
works. But then if some of these things do have like and they haven't been studied that much either. So it's kind of like yeah, if you do some weird biohacking thing for like 30 years, like who knows like what
Yeah.
that's about. Uh
That's something that I appreciated with when I encountered Ray's content, was many of the supplements that he advocated or used as tools, because they're not really supplements forever. It's the way that I've seen Ray approach supplementation is it's a point of use item as opposed to
mhm.
I'm taking vitamin E and I will take it for the rest of my life because it's good for you, because lipid peroxidation or something. And when I, like, for example, first time I took progesterone, it just, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and DHEA, same thing. There have even been some times, I was talking about this with Heidi, and I'll probably say that another 50 times in this call, but about how supplements sometimes work and then sometimes just don't work at all. And I know you've mentioned that you are not somebody who feels the acute effects of supplementation. Um, I think I'm the same way to a large degree. The first time I took 8 micrograms of thyroid, I wept because in living memory, had never felt so safe and euphoric, to use Ray's word.
8 micrograms. Let me. Okay. I'm just like comparing
And
that to what I've taken before.
what are you taking?
uh, I have not experimented much with thyroid. I have a bottle of Cynomel and Cynoplus,
Hmm.
and I've cut those into quarters and taken.
That's about 8.
It's like 6. Yeah,
Six and a
yeah.
half.
It's close.
20,
It's close.
25
Yeah.
divided by 4. But I've never reproduced that
Mm-hmm.
feeling. And I emailed Ray about it, and he proposed that it could be the case that you had a nutrient that was just barely hanging on, and then the use of thyroid sort of knocked it into the deficiency category of things. I don't know, but it is interesting that there will be times where I take a drop of Cipro and I'm a I'm a better, healthier, more sanguine person, and then there's times where I could take 8 milligrams and does nothing.
Yeah, that's I don't like that. I have that like the only thing I really have that with is coffee. Um
Really?
yeah, like I can drink most of the time I drink coffee and I don't really like coffee doesn't wake me up and it never really has and it doesn't really keep me up, but sometimes it does and I suspect I don't know if maybe I'm low on calories someday or something, and I drink coffee because usually, like, I could drink coffee at like midnight, or I can drink coffee. I'll do this sometimes. I'll get off of work, like I'll be driving home, say 5 p.m., and I'll be like really sleepy, and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna take a nap and then go to the gym, and I'll like stop at
Mm.
Dunkin' Donuts and get a large iced coffee and drink that, and then just like fall asleep on my couch like instantaneously.
Okay, so Ray addressed that, and that explained why my grandpa does the same thing. My grandpa will have a cup of black coffee at 11 p.m. watching Fox News and then go to bed. And it's I think it was Pavlov actually who discovered that there's a small dose of caffeine is a sedative, a medium dose is a stimulant, and a large dose is a narcotic.
Hmm.
And that, I guess, like U-shaped curve it could be,
Right.
or
Yeah, it just seems to me like some days it hits different. I don't know.
yeah.
So, with that opening banter, uh, so yeah, so most of the topics that you kind of sent notes about were mostly around dieting and calories in, calories out, um, and just or
I think
yeah, around that idea.
there's probably a more interesting way to get into that, which we touched on with respect to Mr. Dave Asprey. And that is, and I actually didn't put this in the notes, so I'll say it, and then you can let me know if you think that's a good inroad. Um, I thought of this idea a while ago, and when I come up with a concept like this, I usually try and just hammer it in the world as hard as I can until it breaks, and see if it's true. And the thought is that a perfectly beautiful mind cannot exist in an ugly body, but an ugly body can exist. I'm sorry, an ugly mind can exist in a beautiful body. Which is to say that if you are perfectly beautiful in the mind, meaning you are correct about everything, you are morally without flaw, then your physiology would express that. And with the note that because some beauty is heritable, your parents would also have to have been in the spirit and the mind perfectly beautiful, because then they would have selected for objective aesthetics.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why that I find that thought interesting is when you're trying to figure out who do you listen to in the health sphere, someone like a Dave Asprey who starts to present with certain things like this, or somebody who's balding. Like, I've kind of made it a rule that I don't listen to anyone who's bald anymore.
That's tough.
That's tough. It's tough. And that's not like a hard and fast rule, but I will be like, okay, they are bald. Perhaps they're incorrect in a meaningful way. I'll just take that into account.
Yeah, I'm kind of like on the fence with the whole like hair thing. Because there are like a lot of people that like seem unhealthy but like keep their hair, and it's just like, I don't know. It's but I mean, if somebody's specifically like talking about a health modality to like
Well,
do
because
something like that.
so many of the biohackers are balding. Another good example is Jack Cruz. I won't listen to Jack Cruz on. I'll take everything he says with a grain of salt because he's just covered in lipofuscin.
You know, I
Like,
never like I don't think I've consumed one piece of Jack Cruz content ever. And it wasn't like on purpose. It wasn't like I saw the guy and I was like, that, like, no way. I just like my road to like the different books and content creators and online and stuff that I went through just didn't pass through Jack Cruz at all. And
Right.
I didn't used to think that was weird, but then like as I meet more and more people that have, it's like starting to seem more and more weird that I just don't I just don't know anything. I mean, like Steve Businger, he like everything I know about Jack Cruz is basically just from listening to him talk about Jack Cruz.
Right. Right. Yeah, he was one of the OGs, light, water, magnetism, sunlight, red light, but huge on omega-3. I mean, he was like a DHA is the most important thing. DHA plus sunlight is how you run the motors of every cell in your body or whatever. Very anti-deuterium. Came up with something called the Quantlet, which was like a watch that shone red light into your capillaries of your carpals. That's who we're.
That's kind of funny, like
That's Jack.
Quantlet. It's like a little quant, like a manlet. It's like, oh, Jack Cruz with his Quantlet. Yeah, I mean that's like cool and stuff. I don't know. A lot of those people just kind of turn me off because I think a lot of the marketing of who's that? Paul Chek, you know that guy?
Yep.
Like it's the presentation of a lot of that stuff, like the personalities didn't appeal to me. I guess that's probably why I got so into Ray for a while, is because he was just like, I don't know, kind of talking about biology, but like the words he was saying were from biology, but like the sentence structure, like the syntax was like sort of like English lit critique or something.
It looks like we lost audio, is what I'm hearing.
Uh-oh. Like both of us?
I don't know. Somebody said audio is dead. Audio is cut out. Audio is fine from other people. Danny says audio good
Okay.
for me.
Okay. Okay. Damn.
It's just one person making everyone upset.
All right.
It's, English syntax, Paul check.
Yeah. So like because when I was going through graduate school, I was doing like sort of almost like a carnivore diet, and then it's just the way a lot of people talked. Yeah, I kind of it's just it was all timing. Like I went through the process of graduate school, which is kind of a process that subjects whatever you think to the kind of like evidence based, like the way that those people like think and discuss things and kind of like throw like cold water on whatever. Um, that process, like you're subjected to that in a sort of boot camp in graduate school. So it's like, because you're stuck in like a classroom or you're stuck in a lab and you can't, like you're in a reverse echo chamber, where like nobody is kind of like talking about alternative stuff and everybody's just like, yeah, I don't give a shit. Like what, like just show me like real, like data driven. So
Mm.
because it happened at the time that it did for me, it like killed all the low carb stuff because that stuff was subjected just in my mind because it was the last thing that I had, went through. So like the way, and it's almost like when I was a teenager, like the first time I threw up really bad on alcohol was with orange juice mixed like screwdrivers. And so for like years I couldn't drink orange juice without like kind of having like a shudder.
Yeah, fireball for me. Not that I drank as a teenager because I never broke the law.
Right. So for me, like there's like because I guess anything that I got into after graduate school or after being in graduate school, it's like I'm like more open to it or whatever. So, and not that the Jack Cruz or any of that stuff I had been exposed to, but like similar ways of talking and similar. So like it's like a style that when I see it, my reaction is kind of.
Do you know Michael Eric Dyson? Do you know that name?
I know the name, but it's kind of like Jack Cruz. I don't really.
So he's not in the health field. It's a political guy and like an NAACP activist. And he has like this classic Southern preacher, snake oil salesman cadence of speech that is, I guess, works for enough people because enough people are ingesting this. But yeah, with the presentation thing, I think that's so important, especially when you're coming from a place where you're not consuming any sugar and serotonin is high, and you might just kind of be in this. Because I did the carnivore diet, I kind of went through every iteration that everybody who lands sort of where we are went through. And in that space of stress, like I don't want to get too. That's probably TMI, but I I just had a possible anecdote about how bad carnivore was, and then how good things got when I started eating carbs, but unnecessary. The presentation thing is huge, and something that I appreciated about Danny and Georgie's content and Ray's content, which was actually, and even Wall Thornhill, is none of them cared if you agreed with them. And that's actually what started to change my mind, because I was in the sort of authoritarian place of like posturing up with respect to nutrition. And my buddy Lucian, who I had met working for a blue light blocking glasses company, was like, "Hey, have you heard of this guy Ray?" No. And he's like, "Well, here's an article. He says caffeine might be like a vitamin. It might be anti-stress." And I was so upset, like so immediately upset. And his response was kind of like, "Oh, okay," which wasn't what I was kind of expecting. And then the same thing with Dan, Cows Eat Grass. you know, his blog, you know, Cowsy Grass.
Mm-hmm.
His blog, which is, it's very unapologetic, but also he's very unapologetic and like does not care if you agree with him. And that sort of relaxed security in what they believed forced me to be like, okay, I guess I got to read this poorly HTML wall of text from Ray.
Yeah. I remember that. I remember those days on the old ice cream drawing website.
Mm-hmm.
So calories, though.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I've talked about this a few times, and my basic perspective is, it's mostly just that the people that, like, I'm thinking of some meme, you know, that one of the people that, like, maybe I've argued with recently on Instagram or whatever would post where somebody, and they think this is funny, which is another like big turnoff for me when somebody is like cargo culting memes, and like they clearly don't, they're not funny, but it'll be like, patient says I'm in a caloric deficit, but I'm not losing weight. And then like their response is like, well, then you're not in a caloric deficit. And it's like, everybody's like, ha ha, you got him. And it's just like, wow, this is, so I think, I really don't have too much of a reason to like not believe in, you know, the conservation of energy and all that stuff. And that, you know, if you meticulously followed every bit of caloric intake and output for a while, and then like took the body and like burned it in a bomb calorimeter, it would probably just contain, you know what I mean? Like it would all be there, and
Yeah.
that would be good. But I'm not sure, like that's clearly not super helpful for a lot of people, because for whatever reason, whether, I mean, I guess the conclusion that people that think that's the ultimate sort, like, piece of information about losing weight is like, oh look, I like found the answer. You just eat less calories, or you consume less calories than you use, and then you'll lose weight. If you think that way and you just think of it like that, you know, then the only conclusion is that people are just like dumb or lazy, or, you know, if,
No self-control.
yeah. And if you ask these people, they'll say like, oh, you know, no, like some people have whatever, you know, like different like satiety signaling, and it could make it harder. Or, and then of course at the fringe, there's like hypothalamic obesity, which is kind of just like a blanket term for when somebody's, you know, satiety and metabolic appetitive centers in the hypothalamus are just not working properly, where it's like they'll be put on a strict, super low calorie diet and then lose weight so slowly that it's like kind of ridiculous, you know? And so there's a point where there's like a clinical diagnosis of that, you know, and you could produce that like in animals. You could just go into the brain and kind of like beat up the arcuate nucleus a little bit, and they'll just do that. They'll, I mean, depending on like what neurons you happen to damage when you create a lesion, they might.
But like that's important.
Right.
Like the extremes of dismissing bodybuilders because it's like, oh, they take steroids, or oh, well, this person has damage to their hypothalamus or something like that. To me, that's more instructive to the question of like, why is there more adipose tissue filled with lipids on this person's body than this person's body? Like I remember Greg Doucette saying, like, I don't care about your thyroid. Don't tell me you're hypothyroid. Like, diet harder than last time. And
He does have a good
and
tagline. I mean, I don't like it, but like it's clearly sticks.
it does stick, but it does also encapsulate the ethos of like bodybuilding or fitness, which is that you are a bomb calorimeter and it is only moral failings
Hmm.
that are responsible for your body fat percentage
Right.
when it's like clearly not the case. And I think steroid use is actually more informative and interesting to the question than people give it credit for. They just dismiss it. But if you think like taking androgens, we'll just isolate it to androgens, does so much important things that you can have people step on stage at a level of leanness. The dumbest thing you could do is be to say, well, it's because of steroids and also they work hard, chicken, broccoli, brown rice, and cardio.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, like the thing is though, that kind of, yeah. So when I was talking about the extreme case, like, yes, it's instructive and informative, and I think one of the biggest reasons why it's informative is because there's no, and this is basically true of every disease that isn't like a monogenetic, like you have this mutation and now like you have maple syrup urine disease or something, or you don't have like, but most, like whether it's diabetes or like heart disease, it's all on a spectrum, right? We're all on a spectrum here at Kyle and Friends. We're all on the spectrum. And so it's just a judgment call. Like if one person, like if you just have like two women and they're like kind of obese, like average height and like 175 pounds or something, and whatever, like, and their body fat is like whatever would be kind of like, oh, okay, I need to lose like 30 pounds or something, whatever. Um, if you put both of those women and they're like and their metrics are the same, if you put both of those people on the same diet, they won't lose weight. And like, even now that I'm thinking about it, it's like kind of ridiculous because yeah, you can't like control, like, I don't know, one of them just like likes to go for a walk or whatever, but like within reason. But there's some pretty big differences that you can get in how much weight people will lose. Now, for most people, and if you're dealing, like if you have patients or clients or whatever, if you're like a nutritionist or some kind of person that's dealing with people, helping them try to lose weight, most people are going to be within like, the normal middle of the response. And like some people, like there's some people that can just stop eating ice cream after dinner that they have been doing for 20 years and just like lose a ton of body fat. And then there's some people that have to clearly exert a level of effort that is like multiple times more than other people to lose weight even slower. And there's a point at which doctors and whatever, like if they were in a study or something, somebody would start to call that a pathology, like, and maybe start to look at what's going on, like hypothalamically, their pituitary, whatever. Look at their thyroid numbers and stuff like that. And there's a point where it's so, but before that, like there's no fine line for that. So it's like, to just tell somebody like, oh, just like eat less. I mean, people are only going to do so much, for so long. So, if they have like not a clinical level of what they, hypothalamic obesity, but like something subclinical where they're just not going to be able to maintain a sufficient caloric deficit for long enough to lose the weight that they want to, because like their brain is just screaming at them all day, as opposed to somebody else who just feels kind of hungry for half of the day to be like in a, say, like 300 calorie deficit or something. Like for some people that's like, man, I sure wish I could like eat some more, kind of, but like this is okay. And for some people, they're like it's like, get out of my head, get out of my head. Like they're just thinking about food. So that's how I think about it.
The spectrum thing's important. It might even be like a bell curve, and the people on the extreme end of the bell curve, I'm gonna guess, is being pushed further and further, or it's becoming more and more the mean, because I mean, you posted that study about flame retardants in pillowcases interfering with ghrelin. And I think that sort of thing is, one of maybe 50 or 60,000 things that are interacting with our physiology on a daily basis uniquely. For example, I have narcolepsy, and I was diagnosed 2-ish years ago, and it really started to explain the increase in body fat percentage. Like, I gained 25 pounds in a year, and then 50 pounds in 2 years. And like, some of it was muscle, but like some of it as like I didn't change anything. What's happening, and just lethargy and all these things. And then it would be like going to an economist and saying like, how do I get rich? And they're just like, save more.
Right. Then you spend.
Save more than you spend. Like, what's so hard about that? And from the beginning, pre-Pete, pre everything, it was like, never in my life have I been like shredded. I just didn't have the genetics, the epigenetics, whatever. And I think like at 13, when I realized like what abs were and that I didn't have them, it was just immediate. Like, now my life will be spent pursuing, like, seeing muscles on my stomach. Mm-hmm. And that drove into like the carnivore and the Pete and everything, and just constantly asking the question. And this is where a lot of like my notes came from, of how do you get like the fat off the body? And then also like, why is it there for me and then not for another person who eats terribly, doesn't, go to the gym, stares at blue light until 2 a.m, and they're Adonis. Mm-hmm. Like, what's the difference here? And I think that may have been one of the first questions I asked you, actually, which is like, what is the physiologic characteristics of a lean person? Mm. Is it high amounts of DHEA? Is there like a genetic profile? Is there ethnicity, latitude? Like, do you have thoughts on that? Like, what would be, if you were to take a lean person and do a post-mortem and say like, this is causative?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a few different types of lean, and sometimes you can see it in the same person over their lifetime. Like, just, like, there's anorexic lean. Right. And then there's like somebody who's like, for example, I remember and this is in the early 2000s, I saw there was a magazine article that, I don't know, do magazines still exist? Like
I don't think
like
so.
The kind of because my family has like a little grocery store in New Jersey, and I worked there when I was in college, and there was a magazine rack, and I just remember all the magazines at this time had Jennifer Aniston and Brad Pitt. Like, it was the whole thing. And so there was this one article in there about one of the Kennedys.
JFK Jr. probably.
Yeah. So I'm not very good with the Kennedys. So all I know is that he was probably in his 40s or maybe 50s in the aughts. So whichever Kennedy that is, who's a politician.
Not Junior. I don't know.
Maybe he was in his 30s.
Maybe.
I don't. It's like, but
Lucian would.
What stuck with me is it had his picture, and it was like kind of this puff piece. It's like, oh, this guy's cool, like, and he had a quote like, oh, you come from this family, like, do you want to be like a great man? And he's like, well, first I want to be a good man, and all this kind of corny stuff. And there was a picture of him at his current age, which is like, say, like my age, like mid 30s or maybe like 40 or something, and he was like lean. And I think he had he was carrying like a surfboard on the beach, like he was going surfing. And then it had a picture of him from high school, and he was like playing football or something. And I think he had his shirt off, and he was like a little bit less lean, but he was really muscular. And it really like struck me, because I was like, this guy looks like a totally different phenotype. Like in his say like getting kind of close to middle age, he looked like somebody who was I guess you call like svelte or like athletic maybe. But like if they said I don't work out, that wouldn't weird you out or anything. You'd be like, okay, that like they're just naturally thin. Or if it's like, oh, I do cardio. But when he was younger, there's no if he said like, oh, I don't lift weights or something, you'd be like, all right, like I don't believe that.
Mm.
So what would be interesting to me, like I really don't know like any kind of objective like this, you would have like this biomarker if you were lean. But what would be interesting is to look at different people even over their lifetime, like somebody like that.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, what hormone profile and whatever, like what was his blood CO2 or and stuff like that when he was
Right.
like
Respiratory quotient.
yeah, like 17 or 18, and like what was his body composition, and then when he was older, like, and what's the difference, and then like look at other people and see if that strongly correlates.
Well, with golden age bodybuilders, they, unless all of them were lying, which is entirely possible, they'll say that like Arnold, they're like, it's, D-ball and primo, or D-ball only and no PCT. And like Dorian Yates, pretty sure he went from natural to winning his first bodybuilding competition on like 30 milligrams of D-ball for like 6 weeks. So, and then now you have guys today who have to take grams of gear to achieve a third or a quarter of the quality and muscle mass. And I think it really has to, and I was just thinking about this too, and I hate to give this guy more airtime than he deserves, which is zero, but Stop Being Confused About Health posted like a side-by-side photo of like a vegan and Sean Baker, and was like testosterone 377, testosterone 7 whatever. And it made me think that because okay, well, coming out party, I've taken plenty of things including testosterone. And more testosterone does not seem to be the answer. More free testosterone does not seem to be the answer. In golden age bodybuilders, if they're taking D-ball, they will be suppressing, endogenous production. It seems so much more like Gilbert-Ling association induction, structuring, energy, hormesis, stimulus than it does like this hormone confers the accrual of contractile tissue. And I have to wonder if the just saturation with endocrine disrupting chemicals from like 1960 to present, quintupling, or however many X it's been, has more to do with like people's. In addition, one last ADHD thought. I saw a photo of a 1919 men's beauty contest.
Men's beauty.
And it was like men in these ridiculous underwear, like striped boxers, and kind of like a belly and pretty thin arms, and these glorious mustaches. And they're all just kind of like posing. And I told my coworker, I was like, there's just unrealistic beauty standards for men today, right now.
Right.
So I don't know if there's anything in there that struck you.
Yeah. The whole like endocrine disrupting thing, that's like, to me, it's just this inscrutable question, and it starts to get into real like OCD territory, because people can get really scared about, like their day-to-day objects, which
I don't take a receipt from Publix.
I try, like they give it to you and I'm just like I don't know. It must suck to work at a place like that where you're just touching that stuff all day.
Yeah.
But yeah, with the lab that I worked in graduate school, the main topic that my advisor had been doing before was endocrine disruptors, like estrogen mimics, and it was he did some stuff with BPA, but I think the funding was drying up for BPA because that was kind of like an older school thing. And then he was working on what was it called? It was something that's in the grain supply because it's a mold product. Mold makes it, and it's it's like an estrogen mimic. But the funny thing about that science is that and I think we did the lab did do some stuff on flame retardants. I forget which one it was. It's probably the one that everybody studies. I think my name is actually probably on a paper of that, like as like the third or fourth author or something, because I probably like did a little bit of stuff. Anyway, the funny thing about that science is they'll do, you'll have like mice or something and expose them to this thing, and then another group you don't expose them to this thing, and then have some kind of endpoint like their obesity or like blood sugar stuff or something neuroendocrine is what we did a lot of. And the way it'll be published is like, oh, there's 35% more neuropeptide Y or something, just in the treated group, which like makes animals that are more or less like us, like with the hypothalamus and stuff, makes like eat, food, and also like suppresses the metabolism when you're not eating. So, and so the conclusion would be like, oh, this like flame retardant controls these neurons like at the quantity of like 30%. But if you look at all of the, there's like dozens and dozens of, I mean, chemically wise, there's probably thousands of things that mimic estrogen and then also mimic other steroids, but that have actually been like studied in animal models and stuff, at least dozens. And they can't all contribute like 30%, 25%, because then like you, like pretty soon you're well over 100%. So it's like, and yeah, it's like an animal thing, and they're kind of pushing the phenotype, like they
sure.
But it's almost impossible to interpret, because if you give an animal something or you expose it to something and you try to approximate it to what people would be exposed to from like the average use of products and however the estimation is done, and it has this big effect, and then you consider that that's just one of many chemicals, it's like, so that like the what, it's almost like how people can't get like if they have one cold or flu, they can't get another one. It's like if you're being messed up by one endocrine disruptor, like they can't all fit in the doorway at the same time. Which almost makes sense, because then like you're talking about like receptor downregulation or whatever, but I don't know.
Or more of like a saturation thing. So because the question that I've been asking repeatedly to myself and Heidi and whoever else will listen, which is just Heidi, which is like, what is it like ontologically about a hormone and the structure that corresponds to like physical reality? So like PUFA has an effect on cardiolipin, on the mitochondria, on cytochrome oxidase, all these things due to its structure and its unsaturation and so on and so forth. And that's like, we can observe it mechanistically and so on. But I'm almost thinking like morally, like philosophically. So take dopamine, for example. If you do something rewarding or that requires the event to be codified in the memory, dopamine will surround that experience. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if it has to do with I hate to use the word because it's been commandeered and maligned by the hippies, but like resonance almost. That like if DNA is sort of like a tuning fork, like a radio antenna to interpret biological signals and then respond accordingly with protein orientation. then the hormones that surround it are obviously going to associate and induce changes to the DNA that will instruct different sorts of proteins and enzymes to be constructed. Perhaps the same thing is true with memory and dopamine, and perhaps the same thing is true with like steroidogenesis and certain behaviors. If you do like an ontologically or metaphysically masculine activity, like testosterone is required to change your physiology so that you can actually perform that task. So you can be that type of person physically. Does that sound even remotely coherent?
Yeah. I mean, if you don't have, well, okay, so, you know, people can take steroids and like not lift weights and have, you know, different results than if they, you know, lift weights or whatever. And, um, and yeah, there's like a million factors for that. And you could call that like, you get like poetic about it. But yeah, the thing about the steroids, what I've been like doing a little bit of reading with recently is the history of like, and by history I mean like evolutionary history or biological history, and estrogen is kind of like the oldest one. Like there has been estrogen like molecules for a really long time, and then I think I forget whether it was progesterone next or then testosterone. But what was interesting about it is like estrogen is kind of the base level, like, you know, sterol signal for growth and cell division. And then to create like higher structures, you had to break off into progesterone, which would like slow down, you know, like oppose estrogen so that like all of the organismal energy doesn't go to just like dividing cells, you know, and growing. And then for like specialized structures, and then testosterone kind of started to bifurcate into the like when there were, you know, animals that had like the sexes because they had to have different phenotypes. So basically we're like running around with this stuff that is kind of like people conceptualize it like testosterone makes muscles big, which is true, but it's like, you know, it's at different points in development, it, you know, it does different things, and the same thing with estrogen and all these other steroids. So it's kind of like, I'm trying to think of a science fiction example of like if like some advanced understanding of a technology, and then like these people look back at like, you know, 20th or 21st century humans, and it's like like a club, like a caveman with a club. Like the way we use steroids, yeah, it's like it's not super targeted. Like people understand certain things, right. And they're starting to understand like one of the nice things about not so much the Greg Doucette kind of thing. So he kind of does like the drama. Like it seems like he's transitioned entirely into just YouTube drama, and I'm sure he's just responding to views and like what gets more views.
Oh, 100%.
But the Derek, more plates, more dates guy.
Sup guys, Derek, moreplates.com.
Yeah. The one like nice service that he performs is telling people they don't have to take whatever the amount of steroids that you're getting from like bodybuilder.com or like the rumor about
right.
Who's that?
Lee Priest took this.
Yeah, or Ronnie Coleman or whatever. Like,
right.
Yeah, either, well, they probably didn't have to take that much to get the results they got. Like, just because they were the top bodybuilders doesn't mean they even knew like what they were doing, right? Like, the best athlete like isn't the most intelligent about like they just have like an innate ability, right? Like whether it's like throwing a football or whatever, like they can't necessarily explain it the best just because they can do it the best, and they don't necessarily understand. That's why there's a coach, and you know, and then the other thing is like you're not going to respond the way they do anyway. So even if they did require a massive stack of like say 2 synthetic uh, anabolic steroids, and then on top of that, like 500 mgs of testosterone a week or whatever their thing was, and then like an aromatase inhibitor. You're not going to be like shredded 250 pounds or something just because you take the same thing, even if they required that. So
Hmm. Yeah, like the heuristic seems to be with all supplementation, kind of how we talked about before, and steroids. Yeah, it does this, except when it doesn't.
well, like, yeah, I mean, there's two levels of like it does. There's like, okay, so there's something happening, and even like when somebody's on a caloric deficit diet, like you can kind of like look at the mechanistically what's happening, but then some people just don't get the same like continual effects, you know.
So, can you explain something to myself, and hopefully other people have wondered this as well? When like androgen receptor is a great example of this. Like they'll say this SARM binds to this androgen receptor, and then you have RNA transcriptase, which does X, Y, and Z, and then now you have a different physiology. How the hell does anyone know that? Can you actually walk me through that?
A little bit, yeah. Mostly with, so like I said, the estrogen mimics were one of the main topics of the lab that I worked in. And also a kind of in tandem with that was something that was kind of big at the time was, so you got the estrogen receptor, which is, a protein. And so, all right, this is going to be kind of roundabout because all of the ways the the quick. So I'll tell like the long form, but the short form is it's all inference, but some of the inference is pretty well like okay, so we used this thing to measure the outcome of this thing, and we're assuming that it's because this protein has this property, and then you try to do something else that would like rule out something else happening, and sometimes that's done pretty well and sometimes it's not, whatever. So the idea is that there's these proteins floating around that bind the steroids, and so they have like different, they have a place to bind the steroid, and then when they bind the steroid they have a conformational change and either a chaperone or they themselves somehow, and for some of these it's more well explained than others, they translocate from the cytoplasm to the nucleus, right?
They freaking translocate. Okay.
And then they have another domain that has an affinity for the what's called the response element for that steroid. So there's an estrogen response element for all of the genes that are upregulated or downregulated by estrogen, and likewise for anything else that would work that way. So so the protein, would associate with this response element, and then just like epigenetics, kind of changes the shape, like how tightly DNA is wrapped. That these things supposedly change the shape so that for any given transcription event that would happen from an RNA, to make RNA and then to make the protein, it would be more or less likely to happen the more like opened up this area is. So like you've got all these molecules floating around and they're constantly opening and closing the different genes so that on the average there's going to be more output of this and less output of that, blah 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 blah. And then of course somebody was like, hey, but look, we mutated the estrogen response element and it's estrogen so that it can't bind to DNA, and it's still like estrogen still affects the cells. And so then they came up with the cell surface receptor, and they also had rapid effects. So like if you give an animal like a shot of estrogen and then just like kill it immediately and look at its
Mm.
brain, you can see transcriptional changes already at a rate that would be too fast for not I shouldn't say transcriptional changes. I should say you see a difference in like what we would look at would be neuropeptides having to do with appetitive stuff, like hypothalamic stuff, at a rate, because DNA, RNA transcription into proteins is kind of, is in terms of like what cells do, it's one of the slowest things. So you would kind of really want to wait like 2 hours or something to get a meaningful upregulation from like giving a bolus of a steroid. Whereas like in 10 or 15 minutes, you can see the effect of estrogen in certain kinds of estrogen sensitive cells. So then there's like, okay, there's a cell surface receptor, or there's a, so, and like protein interactions. And this is actually one of the things that really dovetailed, because when I was learning this stuff, it wasn't super satisfying, because it was, it felt like instead of taking data and the conclusions being kind of obvious or clear, it was like trying to make it so that we have like just trying to preserve the overall kind of interaction of estrogen with components in the cell, and then just when in an experiment sort of poked a hole in the main model of how estrogen worked, like what I was saying with the rapid effects, looking on purpose for a similar phenomenon that could explain that, rather than just kind of opening things up to. And so anyway, this keeps happening, where it's like estrogen will bind to this protein, and that'll have a protein interaction, which will like change the way the cell does this, and it doesn't have to go through the nucleus. Or, it'll go through the nucleus too, but it has a rapid effect. And then I remember, I don't know if Ray said this on a podcast or he wrote this. Maybe this has been something he said multiple times, but he said the cell itself is an estrogen receptor. Like just cells are, because, and also like, because the triple negative breast cancer cells where they don't have estrogen receptor, alpha, beta, I think, or progesterone receptor, I forget what the three are, but like basically all of the targets that you would give somebody with breast cancer to inhibit the growth of their tumor, if their tumors are of this phenotype where they don't respond to any of this, they don't have the receptors for those steroids, and yet still estrogen like causes the tumor to proliferate. So that really like jived with me. And then also now that I'm looking at like the biological history of estrogen, and it's like, it seems like, but having said that, I do think that there are proteins that are more, that have an affinity for estrogen that do specific things. I just think that probably most, I don't know if there's, I think that cells in general, a lot of components of them are affected by the presence inside of them, or even on the surface, of different steroids, and perhaps also like peptide hormones. And that there's also specific structures that can be like studied and like cloned and produced in the lab and studied in vitro that have on top of that. So it's like redundant, because there's a ton of redundancy in biology in general. So I don't see why it wouldn't kind of be the default position to think that something that's so foundational to all animal life and then pre-animal life, like the estrogen type molecule for stimulating cell growth and division, wouldn't have a bunch of different kind of modes of action that could like tweak its effects for different purposes, or at different concentrations. Like at this concentration, it has this effect on the cell, and then at this lower and that's also known, like with women, they have like a baseline estrogen, and then like it jumps all over the place, throughout their cycle, and does different things. Like when women go through like the follicular phase or whatever, and their LH and FSH surge and all that stuff, like the estrogen at, I don't remember what the normal blood levels are, but like it's not like it does the thing that it does for the rest of the month, but like 5 times more, just because the concentration that can be observed goes up. It's like it does a different thing. It's called like the tonic versus the phasic response.
Right. It does this thing unless it doesn't.
Well, yeah, I mean, it does like, Right. And this is seen in other systems too, like fructose, the KMs for the liver picking up glucose and fructose are different, such that if there's like a low, depending on the concentrations, like the liver will kind of let other tissues take it, or it'll like be really voracious, you know? So it's like, it's not a linear response where like the liver takes up this much of this sugar, and then if there's more of the sugar, it like takes up more. It just has sort of like a, okay, like it'll be like, oh, you know, like at a certain concentration, it'll all of a sudden just like take up a lot.
Well, it's like Le Chatelier's principle, but instead of just two compounds, you're dealing with probably tens of millions in the body being interdependent on each other. So like why quintupling the concentration of estrogen in a female body doesn't just cause like metastases of every bit of
Right.
cancer that might be dormant, is because it's likely offset by or directed and informed by so many other things happening in the body, which is why I often find like there's the the great vitamin D debate that I didn't watch because it was too long, and the and these conversations about like, oh, you should take progesterone, you should take DHEA or pregnenolone or whatever it is. And something I always keep in the back of my mind whenever I supplement with a hormone is that by supplementing with ostensibly the end product of a biologic process that I cannot even begin to appreciate the complexity of, I don't actually know what I'm doing. And anyone who pretends to have described everything that's involved is lying. Not necessarily maliciously, they just can't know.
Mm-hmm.
You can't actually describe all those things. So two questions based off of your description of sort of like how you track the interactions, the mechanistic interactions. First question, what is the difference between inference and telling a story?
Well, so in the science world, you're always telling a story. Like you're finding it. That's why it's called, I guess, journals. You know, and people will say this.
Dear diary.
Like when I took, when you're in graduate school, you have to take writing courses and grant writing courses to understand the way that you're expected to write certain things. And over and over again, it's, find this story. Like you have to tell a story. Like you can't just say, we did these 3 experiments and like this is the data. You kind of have to, well, you could do that. And if sometimes the results are so obvious that they tell us, like it's just obvious, right, what the story is. But sometimes, most of the time, especially now when things are so specialized and like there's these subfields, you have to find the story in the data. So like you come up with, hey, we think this does this, so we did this to mess it up to see if it would change the effect. And yeah, you kind of
there's conflict, now there's drama.
There is, yes. And by inference, I just meant just about anything. I mean, even things that are visualized are still visualized through, like, definitely with something like crystallography. Electron microscopy is probably the worst. They're visualized with because you can't see them, so you have to use tools to see them. And something like light microscopy is sort of the most direct. It's just like these are lenses that magnify structures, and if they are visible in the visible spectrum that like we can use, you're pretty much good to go. And then if they're not, then you have to do all kinds of things. And then if it's a protein that gets crystallized, you have to assume, which I think is probably almost always incorrect to a small percentage, that the shape of it in the crystal is the same as when it's in solution. I think I think for a lot of them, it is probably, and the reason why I think this is like, there's some proteins I've studied where you can actually get the reaction to happen in the crystal. So like you have crystal, you can see that they're the color of the protein if it has a color, and then you put its substrate in there, and the crystal will change color, and like do the reaction, and a lot slower than in solution. But so when you see something like that, you're kind of like, okay, this is reasonable. Like it's reasonable to assume that this protein has been mostly preserved in what it is in nature in this process. But I'm sure there's you can get proteins to crystallize from different conditions that aren't, so anyway, that's just one example of an inference. But yeah, I just mean there's always some kind of like faith that people put in these tools, and some of them are like pretty low level faith. It's like, look, this is reasonable, this is something that we do. Right. That can be confirmed with like a bunch of other things. And some of them are like, I guess you could call it speculative.
Well, that was my second question. Is you kind of touched on it with microscopy. Did I say that right?
Yes.
And then spectroscopy. I did very minimal amounts of both of those, but and that is the question of, can you watch? So when somebody says this goes, the sugar glows to GLUT4, GLUT4 goes to the top of the cell, it breaks through the phospholipid bilayer and binds it, and then it goes in, and then and then this electron goes from here to here to here. Like, are they just making this up, or was it observed? Like, how in the world do they even, you see these massive diagrams of like cell metabolism, and if that always happens by first removing a cell from the body, doesn't that immediately invalidate like almost every conclusion by at least a small percentage, because it's no longer part of the organism?
Maybe by a small percentage. Well, I mean, sometimes by a large percentage. Like, I think the resveratrol stuff and some of the other antioxidant kind of like
SIRT2 and that sort of thing.
Yeah, there's things that you can get like what would translate into massively beneficial effects with like ex vivo plated cells, giving them certain compounds, and then like nothing like that has ever been seen giving like an animal or a human or whatever. So for sure, for some things, with that, like the whole translocation and glucose transport, I'm assuming, I haven't looked into this, but I have seen some, at some seminars, professors that I used to have showed data where the way that the main thing where they proved, for example, that I think it was perilipin that I'm thinking of, which is one of the proteins involved in lipolysis. They would mutate the gene so that it has a fluorescent protein, usually green, sometimes red. And then, you would have to take the cells and put them on some kind of visualizing thing, usually a microscopy slide, excite them with the fluorescence and observe that. And so the idea would be like the cell condition that doesn't activate this protein, and you would see all the fluorescence like in the middle of the cell. And then in the condition where it does, it would be all on like around, I was going to say edge, but what's that side of a circle? Perimeter? Yeah, because it's perilipin. So it's like
is it a perimeter? What's it? Surface, I guess.
Yeah, surface. Because it's a sphere. But because when you're looking at it like a circle. Yeah, whatever. So it's like fun with shapes. So some of this, so like something like all of the glucose transporters, or I should say the hexose, whatever. I would assume that enough of that kind of thing had been done that it's reasonable to assume that at least most of the upregulation and downregulation, I mean, glucose can definitely get into and out of cells without those transporters to some amount. But then it becomes like, is that relevant? Is it relevant like postprandial? Is it relevant for like this or that effect of like insulin, for example? So I don't know, but you know what the main problem I see is not something like that that's been established for a long time. Although it's possible. It's possible that something that is really foundational to physiology is kind of resting on like some pretty tentative experiments, and that it can just be, I mean, without a doubt, some of those things will be revised in the future. I mean, it's insane to think that they wouldn't be, and scientists would agree with that. They just they just don't agree. They just like don't like to think about it. They're just like, well, this is what we have now, and then but most people would be like, oh yeah, you know, in 100 years, like assuming civilization doesn't collapse or whatever, and there's some kind of incremental increase in scientific techniques, there would be for several of these established things something that totally reverses the
Right.
physiological story for that thing, and but maybe not for others. But the problem is you start off in a field or like in science in general, and people started using tools, and there was like a sociological requirement that you show things work in more like naturalistic ways, like if you know take the liver out of an animal and be like, look, this animal has fatty liver, and you're just like holding like a rat liver, and it's like you can just see it, you know, especially with an
Right.
animal that size. Uh, and then as the tools got more sophisticated, at first they were used to look at things that you couldn't see, but there was like like they wanted to always bring it back to things you could see. And then as it keeps going on and the tools get like validated, but then you have a new tool that's no longer validated by an observable phenotype and is validated by a former tool that was validated by an observable phenotype. And then and you know 10 or 20 years goes by, and now you have a tool that was validated by a tool that was validated. But and so eventually you get to the point where just like the stochastic possibility of there being uh, issues with just like the causative phenomenology of this assay like exponentially increase, I think, with each like
Hmm.
link in that sort of a chain. So that's how I wouldn't like say that any particular tool is just wrong. I would just say that the culture in general is such that tools are venerated more than they should be, and there's no skepticism given to them at all, except in a few circumstances where like somebody who does this kind of biochemistry will be like, you know what, like Fred in his lab, he does this other kind of biochemistry, and I think it's kind of bullshit. But like, they'll never actually say that. Like in it, well, sometimes people will get in arguments at conferences. Uh, like occasionally there'll be like actually a shouting match between two people who are like the people on like this or that question of something. Um, but in general, like there's a lot of prestige. It's actually it's kind of like filmmaking where there's a lot of prestige in special effects. And special effects are the kind of thing that like requires artistry to use well,
Hmm.
but a lot of people are deficient in the ability to interpret artistry, but it's very easy to interpret impressive special effects, right? Like a child
Yes.
is impressed by better computer graphics than 20 years ago. It's obvious. Or like
Yeah.
the best explosions, yada yada. So it's basically the same phenomenon with science. Like it takes a lot more intelligence to see that somebody's using a fine, delicate tool intelligently than to just be wowed by the new tool.
I am so tempted to take this into terrain theory, and I'm worried it will take us way too far off why we actually are talking.
Possibly. You mean like the versus gene theory?
Germ. Yeah. Well, the with respect to
Okay.
like,
Germ
have we
theory.
isolated and purified and demonstrated that coronavirus A is like here in a new form,
Mm-hmm.
and B causative of disease, and like based on everything we just talked about with like the tools and the emphasis and so on, like I think the answer is no.
Yeah, I
And
would have to
that's
see those tools.
consequential. And and that's the thing, I'm not the person to talk to about that, because I'm only now being presented with the idea that like, hey, maybe germ theory is misled. It seems to be the post hoc ergo propter hoc logical fallacy, where like if I sneeze right now and then lightning strikes, my sneeze didn't cause the lightning strike. And the terrain theory advocates are saying that viral material is downstream from an insult to the organism,
Mm-hmm.
and not actually causative of the insult. Um, Again, it just
That's
came to
kind of
mind
like
because
the
of
Ogenus Vonderplanets. Have you read him on viruses?
yeah. So he's making the rounds in my brain recently. I ate some raw chicken breast.
Yeah, there's really an Ogenus revival recently. It's a wonder to behold.
It is, and I'm not above anything, so I'll try everything. And I have tried everything. I think I mentioned this to you maybe over Instagram, that because of some really intense OCD, one of the obsessions or compulsions is sort of like a refusal to let something go until I've explored it fully, which usually involves taking it all the way to the extreme of eating the food or doing the practice or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And that being said, he made a claim that I thought was hilarious, because I know you've talked about this with Leo and others, but um, he said like raw fat, you have to keep your fat raw.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot heat it or freeze it. And specifically when you heat it, he was saying that the fat molecule expands 50 to 100 times. And so he's like, I'm 12% body fat, but I'm like 180 pounds because I'm denser, and that's how fat works or something. And the other day it just like hit me. If I took, that means, unless I'm severely misunderstanding, that means if I took a spoonful of fat and put it in my pot on the stove, the whole pot should fill up with fat afterward,
Right.
because I've heated it and it expands for some reason. Um, but yeah, Agenus's proposition is that the bacteria, viruses, parasites, and germs are our immune system, and that they consume necrotic tissue and
Right.
toxins.
Yeah, specifically, I think he said viruses are secreted like endogenously, like they're just fully made by our cells.
Well, and Ray has said, I think, somewhat of the same thing, or at least I've interpreted him to have said something similar about how like we all have HIV, and then it's simply, and I know Peter Duisberg and company have kind of made this argument that it's the stress state of the organism stressed uniquely that causes viral replication of like whatever that virus is.
You know, I'm not sure that I would go quite that far, but I do have a certain sympathy for I guess a viral load in general, and that just given like the populations that seem mostly susceptible to that particular virus and its effects are probably just taking in a lot of I don't know.
Inferred, understood.
Yeah, like the Duisberg thing, where because he really did try to like when I watch him talk about this stuff, he comes across as like really sincere, and so
Mm.
you know, I don't think that he was like making up his findings or anything. But yeah, there at a certain point, it was just like politically incorrect and socially illegal to question the uh, like single like HIV causes AIDS, which causes this, and there's like
Mm.
there's no other factors. I think like the only I think you can say Magic Johnson, like had HIV and then didn't get AIDS, and that's like the only thing you can say.
Well, he also didn't take the treatment, if I recall correctly, and his counterpart at the time, who was also famous, who got sick, did, and I will refrain from getting too far down the conspiratorial route, but for this documentary that I'm working on, I'm interviewing a lot of doctors, some of the most eminently qualified people. Like I was just in Miami and then in Dallas for Dr. Zev Zelenko and then Peter McCullough. And I made it a point to start asking doctors, are you aware of an isolated, purified, and sequenced COVID-19? More often than not, the answer is no. And I think I'll let you be the moderator on how far this particular conversation goes. I'm happy to let you do that, but I'm of the opinion that there were about 1,300 flu cases last year.
Mm-hmm.
That's just from the CDC, as opposed to 30 million the year prior.
Right. Yeah, I think I've seen that.
In the absence of genuine convincing, here we have purified, sequenced, and then made other people ill by administering this purification that we call COVID-19. I don't know why they couldn't have just kind of like erased the word influenza and then like put coronavirus and nothing would have been different.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of different explanations for why that might be, but if they don't revise those numbers, I mean, the problem with those numbers is like I don't know if anybody believes them anyway. Like,
you're talking about the COVID diagnoses?
well, those and even just regular flu, like I think flu numbers get revised for a while. If they keep the like super low flu numbers, it's kind of hard to. I mean, the only explanation would be that all of the precautions people took for COVID-19 were just effective for influenza, but not COVID-19 because it's like more contagious or whatever. Or
Right.
that people that get a coronavirus, sort of like if you have a cold, you're not really going to get a flu at the same time because like the cytokine production is probably going to just stop any kind of like virus in its tracks. But even still, I think if the numbers stay at like such a basement, like bottom basement level, I would. So I'm always like a moderate. So I'm a total political moderate, as you know, and so my moderate, like just middle of the road, totally normal, and mainstream opinion is that some number that I really don't think I would like feel super comfortable guessing either like raw or percentage wise for years to come into the future, but that certainly some number of that of the COVID-19 diagnoses and all that belongs perhaps in the regular influenza bracket in the table, the CDC table. And yeah, that's my totally mainstream opinion on it.
I was in Dallas, standing outside a bar at probably 1 a.m, and stone cold sober. Didn't have a drink the entire night. I was designated driver, and we had just finished the interview with this doctor, and dude's standing out for a smoke break, and I could just tell, like, physiognomy check, asshole.
Right.
Like he didn't like me already. And I just very casually asked him, um, "Hey man, do you think COVID's real?"
Uh-huh.
And he starts getting upset. He's like, just totally plastered. What are you talking about, man? Of course it's real. I was like, I don't know. I'm not a virologist. Like, I haven't seen it. I haven't studied it. Do you think it's real? And he starts going off. We talk about like the various conspiracies of its origin in Wuhan or Fort Detrick or bats or whatever it might be. And I said, what if I told you it was patented? And he started getting like angry.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I'll prove it to you. I pull out my phone and in about I'd say 50 or 60 seconds, I pull up the global patent from the Pirbright Institute with Erica Bickerton, listing the coronavirus on there, which like it's interesting. It doesn't really matter if that's true to me for like this conversation. And I show him, and then I have to walk away. And as I'm walking away, he goes, "Hey, take that COVID patent and shove it up your ass." And I was so shocked that first of all, that was angry, that telling him that there was a patent on a virus, that like, why do you care that it angered him? And then as I'm like going to get in the car, he starts like walking toward me, ostensibly to harm me for showing him this global patent documentation. That's just an interesting anecdote.
Oh yeah. Anecdotes abound in the current climate of
Just peace and tranquility and unity and healing, the state of healing that we're in.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of getting like sort of depressed about the whole thing. I almost don't care about viruses really. It's just like there's such an obvious breakdown in like the social fabric that is sort of being like on display from several political events, of which this could be categorized as one. And it's getting to the point where like, because I've always like argued politics online. It probably wasn't like healthy, I've just done that for a long time. But at least you can like stop doing it. But like you can't actually stop doing it anymore. Like if I
No.
like when I'm at work, I just have to hear like people in the office, whatever. And there's just no like you can't just grill anymore, And I've never really been like I just want to grill person, but that's because I it's like you don't care about being able to just grill when you can just grill. But like once somebody takes your grill, you're like, you realize how bad it can really get.
I want to fucking grill.
So that's basically my thing about it is like it's such a toxic topic that I just like, I don't know, like I mean, maybe the best explanation is that a lot of the people that are so activated about it are the same people that have said or would say or perhaps are still saying that like we need a mass extinction event like because of climate change or something. And it like, so the same person would be like, we need a mass extinction event because of climate change, and then they'll say like, oh my god, you're not like doing whatever the protocol is to like prevent the spread of COVID-19 that's going to kill people. And like there's just like that, to me just sums up like the whole thing, which is just like I'm mad at like the other tribe, and I've like my thoughts have been funneled into like this topic, and I'm going to like attack people on this topic, and it's just really depressing. Like I didn't realize. I mean, I almost like don't even want to like debate crap online anymore because it's like,
No.
wow, this is so real now. Like you could just walk down the street and it's like how Facebook, when I was like in political groups, used to be like 5 years ago. It's just like on the street. And I'm like, oh
Mm.
my God, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Can I, well, can I make it slightly more
I'm sure
depressing?
you can.
Um, well, it'll be dependent on your answer. Have you, or do you plan to get the vaccine? Any of them?
Uh, um,
And you're welcome to push the big red button and say, let's go back to other topics.
well, I wasn't planning on it. And the main I didn't really think about it too much because last year I had a COVID-19, positive test, and I was sick for like a couple weeks, and then I had a negative test, and then in December or January this past winter, I got an antibody test, and it was positive, and I should really get another one, and I was just hoping that if at some point there's some kind of like force being suggested about that I could like provide antibody results and just kind of like grill with this. Somebody's asking me about abiotic oil. Um,
I don't even know what that
where?
is.
Oh, it's just the idea that like petroleum could be produced from not just like fossil fuels, but from like
Oh,
an
right.
abiotic process. Where does one get more info on abiotic oil? You could probably just Google search abiotic oil. I don't know. I haven't thought about that for a really long time.
Have you tried Googling?
There's supposedly there's a lot of oil in the rings of Saturn. You know, which you know, it's like interesting. And if there is, then that's probably formed abiotically, or some
Yes.
petroleum-like substance,
And
substance.
and I think we should form a Federal Reserve there.
Right.
At
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, like, I think that's yeah, Pufalate in Saturn. No, it's probably saturated. Anyway, so we were getting into a little bit of like Ray and Agenus,
Yeah.
um, and like to me, it's like I can't even really engage with that too much. I just find it sort of amazing that it's like uh, it's like there's two sort of like mystical figures like floating around the internet, like nutrition world, and people are just kind of picking sides, and
Yeah.
it's just this really weird, and it's so different than everything else. It's so different than like carnivore, obviously, vegetarian stuff. I guess it's kind of like some of the vegan stuff or like the like raw food vegan stuff, and then getting into the breatharian stuff because that was kind of mystical, but there weren't really individual figureheads that totally encompassed the idea. Um, so I think it's interesting, and I guess people are eating raw meat. Other people are eating
Silly
sugar
gooses.
and orange juice, and it's just it's just a battle.
This might be a really obvious thing. I know you gave a talk why it's not good to be a fat burner. Um, and was that your thesis or just a talk that you gave at Ancestral Health?
No, that was just for fun.
Okay. I think it's notable, and it might be lost because of just how like stupid obvious it is, that there's just a plethora of gurus and protocols and podcasts and like everything with respect to fat loss. And I think it speaks to like how elusive being lean is And that branches off into two questions, or like the question of whether that's like recent or if we're only now obsessed with it. And the second, which is that it's not hard to gain fat, and it's really not even that hard to gain muscle. Like people say, oh, I'm a hard gainer or whatever. Like I'm sure there are those people, but like the stimulus to gain muscle or to gain fat is way lower than the stimulus required to like effectively become lean and sustain it. And I had that thought the other day, and I thought it was interesting because it sort of speaks to the idea that removing fat from the body is like the last thing that your body wants to do. And to start burning your fat, you have to convince your body that like everything is wrong.
Well, at high levels, yeah. Like you can like increase your fat burning like from pretty simple stuff, but like to drop visibly relevant amounts of fat over a short period of time, yes.
Yeah. And maybe that just stands alone, but I thought that was like,
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a clear asymmetry there, right? Which is like there's a lot of those, like with iron. People are always concerned about iron. Like having too much iron is like a popular thing to be worried about now, and the body is like super thrifty with iron, and it's pretty obvious that like there's no good reason for the body to be as thrifty as it is with iron in our current situation. And it's like, okay, but like, what if you didn't have access to like foods with iron regularly, and you had like a really bad cut and you lost a lot of blood? Like, you'd be like thanking that iron thriftiness. So yeah, there's like these asymmetries where
right.
it's kind of like I was in an ecology course in undergraduate, and there was this really simple model, and it was meant to just teach you that, like, when they have like a nature preserve and something, it's like, okay, you need like this many mountain lions or this many bison to have a stable population, like, because just random crap is going to happen. And so you would have this computer program that like simulates different things, and the output would just be like the population goes up and down. And
Right.
if it was close to like the threshold you needed, if you just ran the simulation long enough, eventually there would be like an extinction event. And then if you were like above the threshold, and that's how the threshold was determined. It's like, how many do you kind of have to start with, where the random events of this computer program never quite get to the extinction event. And so there's an asymmetry there, because you can't come back from an extinction event. Like, that's just game over.
Right.
Whereas the population can always go up and then come down. Like, so, and it's just like that with like anything in the body. Like, if you starve too much, if you lose too much of this or that or the other thing, and you die, it's just game over. So like there's an asymmetry to like hold on to certain things, and like make you really like pissed off and hungry instead of losing weight, because like in the random walk of survival, the being a little bit fat, even in a pathological way, you can come back from that. But like starving to death, you can't come back from that.
Yeah. A question that I had in the notes is that there's a belief that and this kind of goes back to CICO, that the only fat disposal method is like beta oxidation through calorie deficit, period. And I don't think that's the case. There's obviously glucuronidation, and then I presume muscles at rest are performing beta oxidation, even though you're not, in, 110, 120 beats per minute heart rate sort of situation. But that belief is so ubiquitous that like you need to create a demand for fat in order to have a meaningful effect on body fat. And like, do you think that's true, or are there more sort of long-term slow burn efficient ways to just like recomp the body that have nothing to do with
Uh,
cutting 300
well,
calories?
I mean, testosterone, like if you take, or like whether you take it or increase it naturally, I mean, that will recomp your body and it will cause the burning of fatty acids. But there's like a certain amount that you're like doing lipolysis, even in a state where, you know, you have glucose, and
Mm-hmm.
then you've got like max rate when you're, you know, in the fasted state, or perhaps in the fed state with like a zero carb meal.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like you can tweak up the use of fatty acids. I mean, you can tweak it up locally. There was a kind of a fad a little while ago with um, browning of white adipose tissue from like cold therapy and stuff.
Yeah, I definitely did not sit on a couch with an ice pack on the back of my neck for hours.
Right. So, and but the other way to brown, and this is probably like brown fat is kind of a specific tissue, but you could get more mitochondria and more activity in your white adipose cells. You know, anything that increases your metabolism is probably going to do that, and you know that would be like measured by body temperature and stuff. But overall, I mean, if you want to lose like 10 pounds of fat like in a month or two, I mean, that's just not really able to be done without what would be considered in the sort of metabolic community like a, you know, an unhealthy thing, you know, like cutting an amount of calories that is probably going to hit, you know, your body temperature, maybe your definitely your mood, your energy, and if you do it for long enough, eventually, you know, thyroid and maybe some other hormones.
Yeah, and that, I mean, I was just sort of in this sine wave of uh, find diet guru, go on the diet, become miserable and not shredded, and then promise to myself that like I'm I don't have body dysmorphia. I don't need diets. Everything's fine. Wait X number of weeks or months, find new diet guru, report, repeat same process. Um, and as a result of it, it's produced a lot of thoughts on the whole experience of uh, being in this very niche community of a niche community, like the Ray Pete
Mm-hmm.
bioenergetic side of the health side sort of thing. And I'm like, check my notes. That sentence is just going to end as awkwardly as possible. That's how it's going to end right there.
Yeah, I mean, people in the Ray Pete sphere like tend to have trouble with body weight unless they don't, and it's basically like because it's kind of like an anti-diet, and it's not.
Right.
Yeah, it's basically like if you just add all of the like high calorie foods and whatever to your, you know, to your diet after you've been like in a kind of restrictive diet, then I mean, unfortunately, most people are going to experience fat gain from that. And, you know,
Yeah.
depending on where you're at, it could be hard to lose. But, you know, it doesn't happen to everybody. And usually people at least feel better. So they're like, because, you know,
Yeah.
people on, it would be nice if there was just, this is like it's almost kind of why like I'm not tired of talking about nutrition, but like it can be kind of depressing because when you really look at success rates of people doing this or that, you kind of get to the point where it's really it's like the most soft hard science. So you're kind of like, okay, well, if we could like put everybody in a metabolic ward or something, then you could definitely make people lose weight. But like actual free living people, like what is a modality that will improve this health outcome? Blah 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 blah. And there's just too many factors, and the even to study it, let alone to like apply it to these free living populations. And there's always going to be people that respond well to something. And then of course also like, which I've talked about before, like the short-term versus long-term effects, which even on the science level, like basically everything, people send me all this crap and it's like, well, look, this clinical, they always just say like this clinical study, like that just makes it holy writ, but it's like, oh, it's 3 months. It's like 3 months. That's a really long time for a mouse.
And a fruit fly.
Yeah.
And that's about it.
And yeah, so it's like like a 3 month human study is like 3 days of like a mouse, you know. So just like for comparison, like because when you do like say a year of a mouse study, you're trying to sort of look at something that could be applicable to like lifelong, like, or at least 10 years or something in a like something that this isn't an acute effect. This is what will happen from this diet. Like this is like a stable, like if you give a mouse like say a high fat versus like a high carb diet or something and look at them for like a year. But with a human, like there are plenty of people that can go on a diet, like a carnivore diet for a year and feel awesome. And then the next year feel like crap. So
I think a lot of these questions hinge on like the entire nutrition sphere hinges on two main questions. And the first is how do I feel better? Because I don't feel good and I don't like not feeling good. And two, how do I look better aesthetically?
right.
How do I, and then how do I have both at the same time? Because they seem so often in conflict. And that's sort of where my last note came from, is the idea of like bodybuilding or the fitness industry as trying to achieve a specific human aesthetic that we've all agreed upon as ideal. And I don't know that enough thought is given to where that came from. I mentioned like in 1919, like the men's beauty pageant and just how they looked. They would be ugly as sin if you show them to like any woman today. Or even I've noticed this in my very brief lifetime of like what high schoolers looked like when I was in high school versus now. And then like my sister's, who's older than me, like her high school, like what did the girls look like and what did I find attractive? And then looking back at like 1950s pictures of what was like the most attractive woman at that time, and it just like monkey brain neuron does not connect.
Right. There's no scene girls.
So what, like, where did that sort of come from? And perhaps it is the case that we are chasing an aesthetic that is not rooted in any sort of rationality, but is also anti-life in some way, or like biologically unfriendly.
Yeah, well, if you take away like the like say like OnlyFans, like that's an example of taking away a social control on something that is maybe like a natural behavior, like a voyeuristic for attention behavior or for resources and attention, that had like a tight social control on it and also a technological control. And then those things were lifted, and now you have behaviors that are basically been mainstreamed, just about, that are a lot of people think like they would like kind of call them unnatural. And that's the way I see bodybuilding, is like each technological innovation, even just weights, like,
yeah,
right.
Yeah, OnlyFans was 3 years. The dumbbell is like 120-ish years, 100 years.
Yeah. Because I think about this a lot because when there was all those lockdowns and stuff last year, I couldn't go to the gym, and I bought a couple of things to work out at home. And one of the things I bought was a sandbag, and it was 125 pounds, but I didn't fill it all the way. I filled it to like 100. And basically, if you can deadlift like 400 pounds or say like 405, you can't lift like even 300 pounds of a sandbag. Because, you know, the way like barbells and dumbbells are, it's the easiest way to lift that load of weight. Like it's shaped like, you know, so like any other, just any other object, even other weightlifting objects like strongman crap, you can't get the same weight for the same reps.
Right.
And then if you get to like real objects, it just gets like worse and worse and worse. But then, you know, outside of weights, like obviously exogenous hormones and all this stuff. Like, so anyway, the point is you've lifted a natural control on like what the human body can achieve, because like you just have given people all these tools that they wouldn't like, you know, as somebody who is like, I don't know, wins like a really low level local bodybuilding show, probably has a more impressive just raw physique than like the most impressive person like 200 years ago. Like that, you know what I mean? Like somebody who could like just be doing manual labor, or like a soldier or something. Like it's just the buffest, like most amazing, like Achilles, you know what I mean? Like he like wouldn't win like a local show.
Which is weird, because if you look at the statue of David or some of the Greek statues, they do have like both literally and figuratively chiseled abs. Right. You know, but it is it's funny you say that. This is one of my notes here, is that, isn't it interesting how like the functions of our body in the past actually had meaning and purpose, like to chop wood, or to pick things up, or gardening, or love making and procreation. And we have become so over industrialized that we have to then like simulate what a meaningful life was by going to a gym and like picking up things and then putting them back down again. Like, remember when this used to like mean things,
right?
And have like,
I think there's actually
relevance.
hipsters that like go to like factories. Like there's like a leisure activity where they'll, you know what I mean, like simulate like working in a factory or something like that. I mean, people have been doing that for a long time with ships, like being like a crew member, like LARPing as like a, you know, sailor.
Right. I mean, I did that when I lived in New Smyrna. I went to a dairy farm, and like I volunteered on a dairy farm, and it was extremely therapeutic. I did enjoy it, and it was the hardest work I've ever done, and the most dirty my body has ever been.
Oh yeah.
And like just covered head to toe in every particulate matter of hay and wheat and cow, whatever that you could imagine. But I just think that's so interesting, and probably more relevant to the subject of like, somebody asked me like at work, how do I lose 25 pounds? I need to lose 25 pounds. And immediately my brain can start listing off like the physiologic things that can help a person to lose weight. And I'm starting to just try and spend more brain power on considering like what made a person healthy prior to this sort of state. And it was like meaningful activities, whether it was play or work. It was meaningful activities, and then food that just didn't actively kill you all of the time.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, like people don't have the ability, like, you know, there's certain signals that people can pick up on, like, oh, that person is rich because like he has this car or whatever, and just whatever, you know, you can scan somebody really quickly and see like a couple of things, and they could be wrong. Like somebody could just like rent a nice watch and a car or something. So I think with like weight, body weight, it's like a really quick scannable thing that in like a natural setting, if somebody has an impressive physique, that would be like highly indicative that they're healthy.
Mm-hmm.
But in a setting where, like, say you could get, I don't know, like surgery, obviously take exogenous substances, all kinds of things to tweak your body, it starts getting more and more divorced from that. But like we can never really like understand that on like the basic neurological level. Like you can't change the fact that like this body shape looks healthy because it's just like it's the same thing. I mean, there's certainly an attempt to change the way people think about things like reproduction and maybe sexual dimorphism and some other things
Tread carefully, you bigot.
that are like hardwired into the brain for like extremely obvious biological reasons. And there is an amount of like trauma that can be induced on somebody, but that can really only be done for one generation, because if those people are sufficiently traumatized to be unable to pick up on naturalistic cues, then they'll just be gone. And the only people that will survive are the people that somehow cobble together enough of a normal phenotype to like understand and be able to reproduce, you know. So on a certain level,
So
it's a
funny you say
self-correcting
that.
activity.
Like I just told Heidi a couple of days ago, only those who worship God will reproduce. And I don't mean that in the religious sense. God meaning the true, the good, the beautiful, the objective, and worship meaning orient yourself toward and respect and be in awe of and be drawn toward. Like that, as you said, it's self-correcting
Right.
because everything else is by definition anti-life and anti-biology. Being irrational will terminate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe not immediately, but like pretty darn quick after that.
Well, if you have like a long view of time, then yeah, pretty quick.
My buddy just said generational consciousness, which I thought was just
Mm-hmm.
a beautiful, beautiful phrase there.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of like bodybuilding and like health and all that stuff, it just seems like, you know, it's no different than like extremely large breast implants, where it's like a lot of people are like, okay, if this much of this thing is like a sign of like health or whatever, then like, and you
Right.
just keep pushing it, and hopefully, you know, there's like, yeah, there's a self-corrective mechanism that can kick in sooner than later. But yeah, I mean, obviously, like it's not even hidden that that professional bodybuilding isn't a healthy activity. It's not a healthy lifestyle.
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. Yeah.
So like, what are we doing? Like
It's almost, it's pornography. It really is. It's a
right.
supra stimulus that keeps the mouse hitting the bottle of
Mm-hmm.
water with cocaine in it.
Right. Yeah.
If you ask any bodybuilder or anyone in like the fitness Instagram influencer or whatever, none of them will say like this is objectively good, like healthy, okay, at the extreme ends.
Right.
And yet, that is what everyone is pointing toward. At least as a compass, at least as like an orienting reflex, it is those physiques, and it's very interesting.
Well, if you're like if you just have like normal friends that like don't work out or whatever, and you work out a little bit, you'll be like, you know, it'll be like, oh wow, you know, like you have an impressive physique. But then somebody who works out a little bit is like in the gym, and then they're around another group of people that work out, and then there's like sort of the elite of that group. And then if you're in the elite of a group at the gym, you probably hang out with different people, you work out more, you have probably dabbled in you know, performance enhancing drugs and stuff. And you just keep having these like different groups, and there's always like the sort of elite for that group. So if you were, and it's the same, like, you know, this has been done a lot in economics with money. like somebody will feel rich when they start making like six figures until they live in a neighborhood where everybody makes that much, and then they have to make like seven figures to feel rich. And then most people that are in that income bracket don't actually feel rich, at least like it rapidly fades, and their kind of baseline spending and just the financial structure of their lives consume, like they, like it's extremely difficult and rare for somebody to keep like the same, not the same, but like close to the sort of spending habits or like lifestyle of somebody that makes a middle class salary, but where they make way more than that and just sort of save it. And
Right.
you know, so people are always on this like treadmill, and like in the gym it's like, you know, literally, but where they like reach a new, you know, bracket of like physique, and if they were just like the only person on earth that had a good physique, then they'd probably be like, there'd be no reason for them to, you know, do anything else. But then there's always something, and they're like living in another neighborhood, so to speak. You know, they moved to a richer neighborhood, and now all of a sudden they're like not happy with their like 14% or 12% body fat and like visible abs, but
Right.
not super deep cuts. Now they need like under 10, you know,
Yeah.
and it's
Well,
just how everything is.
to go completely Ted Kaczynski on you, the internet has made everyone your neighbor. The whole world is now your neighbor.
Right.
And I was just speaking about this with some friends of mine about how like Instagram has made it such that you always know what you're missing out on with respect to girls.
Right.
So if you've got a girlfriend or a wife or even just a girl you're interested in, your interest can just be demolished forever by 150 new girls that you see like while taking a shit. And at no other point in history was like the bounds of your system all of it.
Mm-hmm.
The bounds of your system was like your neighborhood, where you worked, and if you went on a flight like at one point in time.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And
And like actresses, like people would be like, oh man, if only I could like, you know, but like there's sort of an
yeah,
understanding that those weren't real people. And
and
Instagram
everyone was
people
okay
aren't
with
real
it.
people, but they yeah, there's like a trick. It would actually be bad enough if you could meet like hundreds of people. Like that in itself would be bad because it's like not natural. But it's even another level worse because like your brain thinks that you can do that, but you can't do that. So it's just like this totally fake thing where you're like, well, you know, I have this ace in my back pocket where I could always just like date one of these Instagram girls whose pictures I look at.
Right, but you can't.
Right.
You definitely
And you
can't.
wouldn't want to.
And
Because like if you've
no.
ever like I don't even go to the beach that much or to places where people take Instagram pictures, but I have seen girls taking Instagram pictures or their boyfriends taking their Instagram pictures for them or friends taking each other's Instagram pictures. And it's fucking disgusting. Like it's
Like
so
I take Instagram pictures of those people. It's terrible.
yeah. So like imagine like dating somebody who's like, "Hey, do you want to go to the beach?" And it's like, "Yeah, I want to go to the beach." But like you're at the beach, and what being at the beach is has now turned into this thing where, and it's not even just like taking pictures of people can actually be fun, but now that it's such a like commodified thing, and you just look like
Right.
an asshole because there's like everybody knows what you're doing, and you have to have like a certain level of like I don't care, like I'm just gonna pursue my dreams to like have my butt be like viewed 60,000 times on this like app, which is actually like a common dream of people now. Um,
Oh.
but yeah, obviously all of these things are like interfacing because those people will sort of, I think, I think you froze or I froze. Let me ask the chat here. Am I frozen?
Yep.
Oh, hey.
All right. Hey, how you doing?
um. Oh, okay. All right. I was just asking the chat, but it looks like we're back. Okay.
Word. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so with respect to the Instagram models, but it's also true with like, and not to play the whole like men's rights activist card, not because it isn't true, but because it's cringe, no matter how true it is. But there is an I think what women talk about, like going on Instagram and being like, this is unattainable standards, is it's now a level playing field of unattainable standards for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Like we are all unattainable, no matter how talented you are at whatever it is. There's an Asian child on YouTube who's been doing it twice as long and 50 times better than you, in every domain.
Right.
And I think it was Jonathan Haidt who talked about this, where when in 2008, when the iPhone was released and like Instagram and Facebook became apps that you just like had on your phone with you at all times, like women's middle-aged women's SSRI use and depression hockey sticked.
Right.
And I feel like the word like trauma is thrown around a lot, but I think it's might be appropriate to say that this sort of exposure to a hierarchy that we can't like you just can't compete in,
Mm-hmm.
most people can't compete in, that selects for the people who can compete and do excel in it, might be a good definition of traumatizing.
Right. Because you can't. Well, I guess you could get away from it, but like it's becoming less and less uh, possible. Uh, it's the society is not facilitating not being exposed to it. Um, yeah, I mean, all of these. I almost feel like it's kind of obvious, like whether it's like pornography or like Instagram or yeah, like the bodybuilding culture and all this stuff. Um, the only thing that I really don't like about it, because it just sort of is what it is, and it seems like it's something we're going to have to go through on like a societal level, and eventually people are going to have to make a choice about this stuff. But what I don't like is when there's like a confusion of because a lot of people, it's like you've got the Instagram fitness model thing, and they start to like because all things equal, people are going to just want to listen to somebody that's attractive, and it's like intensified to the point where it's almost like maybe coming back to Dave Asprey. It's like pretty cool that he's like ugly, because like unfortunately, I don't think his information is good. But
Yeah.
it's almost like you should like seek out somebody who I don't know, maybe not is like Dave Asprey, but somebody that like achieved some level of success spreading their information, but without like sexual display, because that would like speak a lot higher of their information. Because any like there's these people talking about like fit, they're just like 20-year-old girls that are like hot and being paid to say like, hey, I eat these vitamin gummies and this is like why I have nice hair. And that's actually like the majority of the market in terms of like
Right.
eyeballs on like fitness content.
Well,
And
it's
that's
also people
depressing.
who never earned it, right? Like the very first thing that I said, which was that, a beautiful, perfectly beautiful mind can't exist in an ugly body, but an ugly mind can exist in a beautiful body, is because beauty has inertia. Like it is heritable, and it can obviously be damaged and you can like ruin it for your kids. But if your parents made enough correct decisions, like you'll be beautiful and you had nothing to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be what the fitness industry is built on the back of, because the dose response to exercise, steroids, dieting is totally unique. And the people who were already going to respond well are going to now be the face of the industry
Mm-hmm.
that you won't touch, period. Doesn't matter like what you do. So I like what you're saying about like where you get your information. And something that bothers me is it seems to be the new edgelord thing to not admire anyone, to be like I just pick whatever I like from everybody because I'm an independent free thinker. And that's true and real and good. Like, duh, no shit. Take like your rationality and judgment are the be all end all, whether you want them to be or not. That is how you operate as a person. But without deifying someone, it is true that you can admire people and that admiration can like better your life. Do you know Soul Bra on Instagram?
Yeah.
Like yours was Folan, Marcus
Mm-hmm.
Folan.
Yeah.
Mine would probably be Soul Bra, and
It's a
for
good
like
one.
who I admire. And I think it's because like holistically, like his physical aesthetic, his mindset, and then like me as like a visual artist person, the aesthetic content that he posts to me comes from the mind of somebody who I want to be like. Like whatever's going through his mind has produced that body in addition to the heritability,
Mm-hmm.
and is drawn to an aesthetic that like I long for. And I think he's pretty wrong about a lot of nutrition things. Like,
I've tried to talk to some of those people, and yeah, they're just too popular to actually like have a conversation with anymore.
no, for sure. And like I don't care.
Right. I mean, you have to. You have to like let that stuff go.
But then it also speaks to like perhaps the thing that's more effective in producing a good physique with a sanguine mind has nothing to do with like whether your bread is sourdough or you use ghee or like coconut.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Those people, like the people that are like Marcus or Sobra or whatever, they follow a thing, and they like put a lot of effort into that thing, and they are relatively open-minded. And if they have like this or that maybe is wrong, like it's not going to be a terminal, problem or whatever. But that's a lot different than like it's not like they're vegan.
There are pressures that would ruin like the whole thing. And that's partly why like I'm comfortable with dismissing uh namely out of ignorance, when somebody who is actually credentialed, such as yourself, explains to me how, like, the technical aspect of perhaps some mechanism occurs in the cell, and like I can't understand it because I'm not credentialed and I haven't been to school. I'm cool with kind of just taking a step back and being more esoteric about it, and like taking the risk of being wrong because I haven't put the work in, because I think there are like checks and balances on truth from a holistic standpoint. So using like Marcus Folan as an example, if he went vegan, he wouldn't be Marcus Folan.
Mm.
He's Marcus Folan because like whatever's going on inside of him was like, that's bullshit. I'm not going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what I mean about being like a perfectly beautiful mind will produce this sort of body. Because you're right about the world, or right enough,
Mm-hmm.
or right in a way that sets you up to be right again in the future.
Yeah, or like your instincts. I mean, because there are a lot of people that are intellectually right about things, but they don't put them into practice, or they don't, just like a keyboard warrior that's like, I'm right, I'm proving you wrong, but like they don't like have anything to show for it. And because there's a huge gap between, I don't know, reading like a bunch of stuff about science and like apply, improving your health yourself. And there's a lot of people they can have like some things wrong on the intellectual level, but if their instincts are right, like they'll probably, you know, end up just engaging in the whole basket of behaviors throughout their life that's better than somebody who's like maybe a little bit more intellectually correct but has like really poor instincts, because then they might not even be able to like apply any of that correct stuff, or it's like they're correct for the wrong reason. Like, oh well, and I've actually, I think I have to like step back from some of the like stuff of some of the Instagram creators that I don't like, and kind of just trying to make fun of them, because actually that's probably not really. I mean, it's funny, and like people have been like sort of egging me on, like they'll be like, "Ha, this is funny, this is funny." It's like, yeah, it's funny, but um, if somebody's saying something really, really stupid, then it's good to, and if they're presenting themselves as an authority figure, then it's probably good to make fun of them. But if somebody's just wrong about something and they're like, hey, I do this, I cut sugar out of my diet and I feel so much better, and that means sugar's bad, but they're like kind of humble about it, like they're not
Right.
just saying like, I know, there's just different ways to present things. People know it when they see it. It's not a good idea to really like try to like make fun of that person, or be like, oh really, like, where's the study that says sugar's bad, dumbass? Like, so I think I need to be like a little more like judicious with that. Like, where if somebody's like, basically just if somebody's making a really specific claim from an authority perspective, then
Yeah.
it's kind of like like if somebody shoves you, it's like illegal to shoot them because it's not like proportional force or whatever.
Yeah. 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 Something that I've really appreciated about, and that I've started to adopt myself, the people in the peak community, my friend who got me into it, Lucian, Danny himself, you, Heidi, and company, even Ray too, is they're not trying to be anyone's savior, and that's tough because like everybody needs a savior, or most people like are kind of crying out for like, hey, my things are falling apart, or this thing's really bothering me, and I either don't have the capacity or the patience to find the answer. So like, you seem to have things together, help.
Mm-hmm.
And um, that can really quickly go to the head, where perhaps you make an offshoot Instagram page and start trying to help people not be confused about health anymore, for example. But like, I've given like brief presentations at work about like, hey, sugar is probably okay, and like you don't need to demonize it, or like this is what unsaturated fats are. And I am uncredentialed, I am unqualified, and I kind of make it a point at every juncture to tell people like, I'm not your guru, and I'm not trying to be, because the reason you're in this mess is because like you've been stripped of the capacity to ask the right questions, and you've just been in place of that saturated with convoluted disinformation. And I'm extremely fallible, as demonstrated by the fact that like 2 years ago I was eating carnivore, and then keto, and then.
Mm-hmm.
So uh, I think that sort of check on, I hate to say ego because I'm a Randian, but that check on um, the hubris, perhaps, of like, I will save these people. Like, they will come to me and I will bestow my glorious knowledge upon them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is, unfortunately, that's like what sells at the at the level, and people are kind of not like interested in doing work or whatever, and they're also not interested in maybe this will help you or maybe that will help you,
Right.
which is unfortunate because, like I said, nutritional science is like pretty soft, and even if you had impeccable blood work and everything for somebody, and they were in a clinical setting, there's still very like you still can't know exactly what would happen from like this or that intervention. And of course we don't even have that. It's like people that just ask us things. So but yeah, well, I mean, what sells is just somebody saying, okay, like if you follow this thing that I'm telling you to do, like you're going to have this result, because people want to be reassured that way. And yeah, I don't know what the solution to that is. I've thought about it for a really long time. I mean, my friends used to tell me like, you should really like speak more assertively, like when you're talking about nutrition stuff. And I'm like, yeah, but like that's kind of like lying. And so like my solution that I've been running with is just pointing out when other people are lying, because I'll be like, okay, I know you don't know that because I know what you're talking about, and that's either not known to the level you're claiming, or like you're actually sort of incorrect in what you're saying or whatever.
Hmm.
And that's kind of my best attempt at being like assertive, is sort of just falsifying when somebody says, okay, like this does this. It's like, okay, what do you mean by that? And like,
Yeah, there's this weird balance because I rage against both sides of people who 'cause agnosticism has no utility. It really doesn't, because we live in a world of cause and effect that is ruled by the objective, and you're allowed to not know, but you're not allowed to say it can't be known or there isn't an answer to whatever the thing
mhm,
is, because that it leads to inaction. That like you do know, or you at least believe, or you at least speculate enough that you take actions every day based on like premises. And then there's the other side, which says like, not only do I know, but I know with certitude, and like I will set these people free from their ignorance. And I kind of hate like both camps. So where I've landed is, um, to steal directly from Rand, place nothing above your own judgment, and then take responsibility and as much decisive action based on that judgment as you can until you collide with incorrectness. And that seems to me to be like, not everybody has that sort of disposition
mhm,
to be presented with an idea that's kind of intimidating. Like I've had to really work on friends to like consider trying thyroid,
mhm,
even though I think it could, really benefit them based on their, ankle reflex or body temperature or any number of other things. And there's a large amount of hesitancy where they're like, well, my doctor didn't prescribe it. And I'm like, correct.
mhm.
But Bitcoin in Mexico exists. So try this. Like you might improve your life. And that sort of disposition of like, I'm the captain of the ship, I'm the master of my own seas,
Mhm.
is really all I want to inspire in people, uh, to just like figure it out yourself and prove me wrong with your own body and your own experiments. Um, but also, I think your law of like anything will work for a brief period of time needs to be like, there should be a like a course that everyone who types in like Dr. Berg on the YouTube search bar has to go through first, where they learn things like whatever you try is going to work for a little bit
Mhm.
and it doesn't mean anything.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it would be nice if everybody was like high agency. Um, I, you know, I think ultimately for any kind of population wide improvement in health, there would have to be like some sort of top down structure that provides a reasonable template that's better than,
Yeah.
like the USDA stuff, that people can kind of start with and then go from there, and then people can sort of, I mean, it gets really tricky, but like in America, people have been cut off from like traditional kind of foods, and then it's been replaced with like a scientifically determined diet, but then it's not actually that scientifically determined. And there's only so many people, with like high agency that are going to go and really give a crap about it. And even for those people, like they get online and they're just like hit with, a bunch of like disagreeing, like mutually exclusive ideas, and like people saying like, do this, do that. So I don't know. It's like an intransigent problem, and like the older I get, the more it's like, yeah, this is just not going anywhere other than repetitive like fads, and the best you can do is sort of, depending on somebody's disposition, like if they're in a fad diet that you think is wrong, you can kind of plant a seed that's going to like probably cause them to get upset,
Yeah.
and then maybe like they'll change their mind eventually. Or if somebody's asking you a question, you can like put them on a path. But like other than those kinds of things, it's like, I don't know.
That's exactly what happened to me. But it's an extremely anti-Pete idea that what you proposed and what I have been proposing, which is sort of the Aristotelian idea that there is a natural slave class and a natural aristocracy, and he said that many thousands of years ago, and I think it's still true today, probably more so. Unfortunately, the presentation of the world is like total egalitarianism. Like we all have identical agencies and capacities to like decide what's best for us and our communities. And I think that's, why we are where we are. And the response to somebody when they say like, okay, well, what if the king is wrong? And it's like, then you behead the king and put the right one in, because Socrates, I think it was, who said, if you have 500 men on a boat trying to get to a destination, do you like ask all of them to steer? No. You have them run their like the ship, the community, and then there's a captain, and he will steer and like guide you through the danger. And I think it's just more dangerous to have 500 people with likely insufficient capacity trying to decide these things. So again, it is like it is an advocation for authoritarianism of some kind. But hey, just get it right. just be correct.
Yeah, or at least like, because like you said, or I don't know if you said this, I forget, but I thought I heard you say this. In the absence of like nobody's really responsible. Like there's like nobody that's responsible for the obesity epidemic or what. It's like, we're all, it's all our fault, and it kind of is, because yeah, there's like nobody even listens to the government guidelines anyway. I mean, on the margins, there's like people, I guess, like if somebody asks their doctor information, which is probably an extreme minority of where people get their diet advice from, then that doctor is probably on some level beholden to like include certain of like the official, this and that and the other thing. But I mean, at this point, that's marginal. Like it's not even the majority viewpoint. So, or like the majority guidance for somebody that's, it's more likely somebody's going to go online and just find something. So yeah, there's like nobody's responsible, and so there can be no correction.
And you kind of just have to show it work. Like I think it was under Kennedy where there was sort of like a nationwide fitness standard where Like you had like the men had to be able to do X number of push-ups and pull-ups and run this distance in this time. And like we looked great.
Yeah.
And
Did they have that in
I
school when you were in school? Because they had that
I
when I
had
was in school.
I had PE when I was really young, and then like it wasn't. I went to Catholic school after that, so it wasn't like government funded. This is what you need to be able to do. But in Catholic school, we kicked each other's asses on the playground field playing rugby with a soccer ball, which was probably way more physically
Mhm.
intensive than whatever I was doing in like third grade.
Yeah, I remember just being in third grade and there being like a year that everybody was obsessed with like how many pull-ups they could do and stuff because there was some kind of thing that had to happen. It was ridiculous though. It was like you just had to do 2 pull-ups. Like if you were a girl, you had to do like one.
Yeah, well, I think we should definitely bring it back. And if there, well, who would you advocate as nutrition czar in nutritionology land?
Oh, I don't know, man. There's really nobody. There's like no um there's no leaders that are kind of in a leadership because all the people that exhibit leadership qualities that say have a big following and are sort of good about their following, I think that they have some pretty bad ideas. So I wouldn't want to put them because like you'd get stuff like nationwide, like you can't buy sugar or something. You know, that's what you'd end up with most of the people that have like some good ideas, you know, about like scientific nutrition, but they're you know this or that. Um, so yeah, I think we just gotta uh, maybe tear down. Like there basically should not be like the current government is not a legitimate purveyor of health information, and so that should just be like ended for the time being, and maybe like a committee to study the issue or something. Um, but yeah, I can't think of anybody that could like credibly because there's just too much disagreement and
Yeah.
there's too much policy. Like the policy it's not even guided. I mean, it's just it's so intertwined with like economic interests and stuff. The way drug and nutritional policy is now that I think it would take like a sort of like you can't really fix that system. There's people that talk about it about fixing like the nutritional guidelines, but it's just kind of nerdy stuff. Like the only people that care about it are the people that talk about fixing it.
Are you partial to the idea of uh, like withdraw and form your own community, nation state, small area? Like I know a lot of people in the community have kind of bounced that idea around of like we'll just leave and have cows and like maybe talk to each other sometimes.
Uh, Not really. I don't think I have that temperament, and I I don't think you know like the Benedict option. Are you familiar with that concept? Like the Benedictine sect that when
The monks.
yeah when the Dark Ages came, they kept the faith or whatever, and then finally when like I guess Christendom like took over Europe again, they had you know so they sort of fled from the collapse of Rome and in the Dark Ages. So I don't really I don't think I have that temperament, and I think at this point in our world there's not really like anywhere to go. Like basically, if you had, I mean, if you're like Amish or something, I feel like we're one step away from them just like being like, hey, uh, like I don't know, making the Amish like take vaccines or something. So
Very close. Yeah. Um,
I don't really think there's anywhere to go. I think we just have to like sort of ride the situation as it is, and hopefully just let any kind of system that is too irrational like collapse under its own contradictions and stuff, which is probably not going to be super fun, but
Yeah, it does seem to be that the way out is through, not out. The way out isn't like leave.
Yeah.
It's the those who worship God will procreate. Those who have the capacity, who have that, I don't know, intellect, spirit, spark, whatever it is, to like encounter what is going to be a terrible, what I perceive to be a terrible uh, next couple of years or longer, um, and come out on top and like come out with a smile on their face and like still a good sense of humor and children, and uh, somehow have just like confronted the world in that way. Because you're right, I keep running through my head like, okay, where do we go? What do we do? And I don't think there is. I think that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I just like there's certain levels of like like LARPing people do sometimes with like those kinds of questions, and with all kinds of things like nutrition and like, oh, if we had like a commune and some, and you know, there might be some people that do that and that have that temperament. I just personally know that like I don't, and also I'm pretty averse to being like the next sort of Randy Weaver person. So,
I'm not familiar.
oh, that was like the last sort of FBI like commune murder, if you will.
Yeah.
So I just you know, I'm just like a mainstream person, with like mainstream normal opinions, and you know, I just like fucking love science. So
Dude, that's all, man.
yeah, I think the stream is getting sort of long in the tooth at this point. Um,
I would agree. Almost did 3 hours.
yeah. So there weren't really any questions other than oh, somebody said fat also browns and has a different function if the metabolism is high, right, to maintain body heat. Yeah. So there's all kinds of different ways to say it. Beiging or browning of white uh, adipose, and then there's like I think there's like some long-term changes you can get, like if you were to do something like take thyroid, or probably some of those cold therapies, but that obviously that kind of has like different effects too. But just on the level of like thermogenesis, yes, like even it's different for everybody, but white adipose is not super metabolically active, but it's more metabolically active in the fed state than the fasted state. And
Hmm.
I'm not sure if there's like tried and true ways to kind of make more of your white adipose brown other than the stuff people talk about, like things that are kind of easy. Um, but certainly, if you are in a food, like just looking at it the other way, if you fast or you starve yourself, heat production, just kind of doing burning energy just to kind of burn it, like those things are going to start getting rationed. So if you just think about it in the reverse, you know, but I don't know if it's like an effect that would be sort of relevant for like losing weight on a, you know, like, oh, I have to lose 10 pounds of fat kind of a thing.
And the methods that I'm familiar with for browning the adipose tissue is stressful. Like like cold baths, ice baths, which I can imagine just tanking your thyroid for, you know, hours or perhaps days after, just from becoming hypothermic.
Maybe. Yeah. I don't know like what the dose, um, I don't know if there's like a kind of area you can nip in and like have some cold therapy that like wouldn't hit other things.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but yeah, generally, I mean, yes, like because there are two like ways to turn up the metabolism, kind of like the, you know, more. loosely speaking, like the kind of sympathetic versus parasympathetic. Like your metabolism goes up when you eat, but it also goes up if you're like running away from like a tiger or something. But then,
or on the back of it.
but then like over the course of like a lifetime or just like like a long time, those different, having those different states occur can have chronic, can have either in the same direction or in opposite direction, like acute versus chronic effects. And there's only so much stress, there's like a point at which, if you work out harder, you do more cold therapy, you shiver for 2 hours instead of a half an hour. Like there's a point where you will start to get diminishing and then negative effects. And it's just that point's different for everybody.
Yeah.
You can't just you can't just like brown your fat harder the next time or whatever.
Get browner than last.
That's probably a good joke to end it on.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. And yeah, the title, I'll change the title and everything in the thumbnail, but as it is, people can watch this. Thanks for the live viewers, and thanks, Nick. Okay.